The cerebral cortex, known as the executive suite of the nervous system, houses our conscious mind. Basically, it is utilized in awareness of self, experience of sensation, communication, memory, understanding or comprehension, and in initiating voluntary movements. Consisting of gray matter, it accounts for approximately 40% of the total brain mass. First of all, in the posterior of the frontal cortex, we find the primary motor cortex, which is located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe in both the right and the left hemisphere. Pyramidal cells, which are large neurons in this area, are instrumental in our conscious control of precise or skilled voluntary movement of our skeletal muscles. The long axons projecting to the spinal cord from the massive voluntary tracts connect to specific areas of the primary cortex, which then connect to specific areas of the body. While in infancy, one may just be beginning to explore this voluntary control. As we age, we continue to develop greater mastery of it. Second, the premotor cortex, located just anterior to the primary motor cortex, again spanning both hemispheres, is the area that controls for repetition or patterned movement, such as driving a car or playing an instrument. This area can be thought of as the memory bank for skilled motor activities. Third, Broca's area can be seen within the circle. It's just inferior to the premotor area. Differs in that it is in only one hemisphere, usually the left. This is the motor speech area and is responsible for directing the muscles used in speaking. Recently, we have learned from PET scans lighting up that this area becomes active with preparation or planning or preparing to speak, or preparing the words for which will be spoken. So just in thinking about speaking, it begins to become active.
Next, we will discuss the frontal eye field. It is located anterior to the premotor cortex and superior to Broca's area. In the picture, this is the red bulge anterior to the premotor cortex and posterior to the frontal cortex. The frontal eye field controls the movements of the eye, which are voluntary. This is a motor, not a sensory region of the cerebral cortex. It serves to activate the efferent pathways to move the eye toward or away from a stimulus. The image demonstrates the voluntary movement of the eyes controlled by the frontal eye field. Next, we'll talk about the primary somatosensory cortex, which is located posterior to the central sulcus or in the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe. It is posterior to the primary motor cortex and superior to the cingulate gyrus. In the picture, this region is the long, thin, central purple structure. The primary somatosensory cortex receives information from the general or somatic sensory receptors in the skin and from the proprioceptors or position and sense receptors in the skeletal muscles. Joints and tendons, the neuron cell bodies then identify the body region being stimulated. This process of identifying the area of the body being stimulated is called spatial discrimination. When the left side of the body is stimulated, the primary somatosensory cortex of the right side of the brain receives the stimulus, and vice versa. Portions of the somatosensory cortex devoted to each part of the body are dependent on the body region's sensitivity, where there are the most receptors. In humans, the face, lips, and fingertips have the most receptors and therefore take up a large portion of the somatosensory cortex. The image shows the areas perceived by the regions in the somatosensory cortex. Next, we'll talk about the somatosensory association cortex, which lies just posterior to the primary somatosensory cortex. This location reflects the function of the somatosensory association cortex because its function is so interrelated to that of the primary somatosensory cortex. The somatosensory association cortex makes up much of the posterior parietal lobe and is just anterior to the parieto-occipital sulcus. Primarily, the somatosensory association cortex serves to integrate sensory inputs, such as temperature, pressure, and tension, that are perceived by the primary somatosensory cortex and produce understanding of the cause of the sensation. This can be illustrated by feeling under your car seat for a lost earring. Your somatosensory association cortex has stored the texture, size, and weight of the earring, and therefore you're able to differentiate between a lost M&M and your earring. In this area, if this area is damaged, a person will need to see the felt objects to know what they are. The image of Braille represents motor activity dependent on the interaction of the somatosensory and somatosensory association cortexes.
I have the visual area cortex receives visual information that originates on the retina of the eye. The visual area uses past visual experience, which are color, form, and movement. It also allows us to remember a person and other things. There are two streams, which is the upper and lower one, which work differently. The lower stream focuses on recognizing faces, words, and objects. The location is posterior tip of the occipital lobe, but most of it is buried deep in the calcarean sulcus. The auditory area, primary auditory area cortex, the energy excites the inner ear, which causes impulse to be the inner ear, which transmit to the auditory cortex, where the sound is interpreted as pitch, loudness, or location. Auditory association area allows us to perception of the sound when we speak, scream, and other noises. All sounds are stored in the referent location. The location is superior margin of temporal lobe, building the lateral sulcus. The olfactory cortex allows us to smell different odors, also aware us of the other odors, and receives sensory information from the olfactory bulb. Rhinencephalon is also part of the olfactory cortex, which includes all parts of the cerebrum.
Now the next is gustatory cortex. This is the region is the gustatory cortex, and which is involved in the perception of the taste stimuli, and which is mainly located in the insula just deep to the temporal lobe. Now visceral sensory organ. Visceral sensory organ is the cortex of the insula, which is just posterior to the gustatory cortex, and which is mainly involved into the conscious perception of the visceral sensation. And this includes upset stomach, full bladder, and the feeling that your lung will burst when you hold your heart breathe too long. Now vestibular cortex. If we imagine this region is posterior part of the insula and just adjacent parietal cortex. This is the part of awareness of balance, that is of the position of the head in space.
Thank you.